Have you ever stopped to wonder what life would be like if we nuked the moon? Well, we just might have been living in that reality if the US Air Force had gone through with its plans on detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon in 1958. The US and the Soviet Union had been engaged in an ongoing nuclear weaponry race that subsequently changed into a space race after World War II. It once appeared that the Soviet Union was dominating the race, especially after the launch of Sputnik 1, which then made the United States feel a sore need to catch up to its Cold War adversaries. This urge to show who's boss then gave birth to Project A119, a mission that involved nuking the moon, which was thankfully abandoned and replaced with the historical Apollo 11 moon landings. Nevertheless, let's put our minds to work and ponder on these questions. Would setting off a bomb on the moon push it out of its orbit? If it does, what would that mean for life on Earth, time, day, and seasons?
Audio Jungle.
Effect in space. So, if we were to nuke the moon, the explosion would be enormous despite the distance between the Earth and its satellite. This is due to the near absence of an atmosphere on the moon, which would provide protection from a detonation. According to NASA, when a nuclear weapon detonated close to the surface of the Earth, the density of the air is enough to dampen radiation, both neutrons and gamma rays, to an extent that the effects of these radiations are typically less significant than the effects of the blast and thermal flux. So, higher frequency radiation would be emitted from the weapon, and only physical distance could lessen its effects. Nevertheless, the moon does not exist in a complete vacuum. It has an atmosphere, albeit an extremely tenuous one. This means that the low gravity of the moon allows the gases within its atmosphere to quickly escape into space. In addition, any astronaut who happens to be within a few miles of the explosion would die almost instantly. People who are observing the explosion from space could also potentially be in danger. This is because anyone close enough to have a good look would be exposed to deadly doses of radiation. To put it in simple terms, there would practically be no safe viewing distance for such a lunar nuclear event. Let's not fail to mention what would become of the moon itself. It would disintegrate into several fragments. These fragments would then be divided into large and tiny ones that could all go in various ways. We can expect some to gravitate towards the Earth, while others would drift away from it. In fact, the magnitude of the explosion would determine what happens to the remaining debris. In the case of a big explosion, the rubble may spread away from the Earth. These tiny meteorites would detonate in space, colliding with unfortunate satellites and spacecraft en route to the Earth or the farthest reaches of the galaxy. A certain kind of explosion could also produce rings around our planet similar to those Saturn has. Earth would then be orbited by the rocks, which would produce more meteors and meteorites. But if it were a mild explosion, new moons could form around the Earth, since there would be larger debris left behind. So we would then have a number of tiny moons instead of one giant moon. As fascinating as this sounds, this is not something we should dare wish for, because it does come with other effects on life. Effect on time, day, and season. On a time scale of thousands or millions of years, our planet would also become exceedingly shaky. The Earth is currently tilted at about a 23.5 degree inclination as it circles around the Sun and spins on its axis. This tilt causes various parts of the planet to face the Sun in different ways depending on the season. Without the gravitational pull that the moon provides, the tilt of the Earth would become unstable and drastically alter. If the moon were to become non-existent, it's likely that Earth could tilt more than 60 degrees. This is something similar to the significant wobble that is observed with Mars, because it doesn't have a huge moon. So what would this mean for the seasons we have become so accustomed to? Well, the seasons would vary with this kind of tilt. Global temperatures would change substantially, and different portions of the world would likely experience ice ages, since they would receive less sunshine. Even though it's unlikely, it is possible that the Earth could tumble over, especially if it is hit by a large debris from the moon. Earth would also lose its consistently cold regions, the poles, which are home to enormous amounts of ice as the climate gets altered. Let's not forget the oceans that would rise as a result of the ice melting, thereby affecting coastlines all around the world. Life without the moon. The absence of the moon would make life weird in the short run and devastating in the long run. If the sole factor affecting the tides is the sun, you can expect high tide to occur daily at noon and at night. Ocean currents and the weather would also be dramatically affected by changes in the tides. Life without the moon would cause water to travel from the equator towards the poles, resulting in a shift in the global ocean levels. Then how about its impact on animals? Even though the presence of moonlight no longer determines harvesting and other nighttime operations in modern society, many animal species still base their routine on the moon. Take for instance, moonlight helps some sea turtle hatchlings to navigate their perilous journey to the ocean. Consider how many species migrate, reproduce, grow, or hibernate throughout specific seasons. Other small species, like snowshoe hares, also seem more likely to spend the night in their burrow. Then there are nocturnal animals that become very active at night. This indicates that both predators and prey depend on the moon, but with the moon gone, they can as well kiss this routine of theirs goodbye, as there would be nothing to tell them when it's time to hunt or retire for the night. Effect on the moon's orbit. While we've gone on and on about how nuking the moon would affect life and seasons, let us now cast our minds to one of the questions posed at first. Would a nuclear attack cause the moon to fall out of its orbit, endangering the Earth and all of its inhabitants? According to scientist Leonard Riefel, who worked on the mission Project A119, the single explosion would have been microscopic, with little effect on the moon. Think of it as a feather attempting to push a truck. However, what if the blast were larger? Do we even have sufficient nuclear weapons to eject the moon from its orbit? The Soviet Union's Tsar Bomba, which is the most lethal nuclear weapon ever detonated, produced an energy equal to 50 megatons of TNT. This is equivalent to the destructive effect of about 3,800 Hiroshima bombs. Also, the total energy contained in all nuclear weapons that have ever been tested is barely over 500 megatons of TNT, while the world's nuclear arsenal currently has the capability to deliver even less than 7,000 megatons. As for knocking the moon from its orbit, it would require an equivalent of 10 trillion megatons of TNT. That's a pretty huge amount of energy we currently can't even dream of producing with any nuclear weapon. With a powerfully destructive force of this magnitude, you can expect that extreme havoc would be left in its wake. After all, the Earth would suddenly become vulnerable to meteorites if the moon weren't around. Adapting to life without the moon. Adapting to life after setting off a bomb on the moon would be nothing like we enjoyed now, making it a terribly bad idea to attempt anything close to it. We would face a completely different environment from what we have evolved to live in, which would be extremely difficult for us and all other living things on Earth. Although these changes and adaptation would occur over a period of probably thousands to millions of years, this would do nothing to change its significance. For certain organisms, moving might be an alternative, but not for all. For instance, coral reefs are delicate and intricate ecosystems that might not be able to adjust to the different water temperature quickly enough and would likely die. Additionally, abrupt temperature swings would have an impact on the plant's growing season and climate, complicating the process of producing food for the planet's billions of inhabitants.